All right, welcome everyone. This is the China Rare Minerals Masterclass. My name is Kunal Chopra. Very excited to have everyone on here for this webinar. Over the next hour, we're going to go deep into why rare earth minerals, especially those dominated by China, are so central to our modern supply chains and what that means for manufacturers, compliance teams, and leadership. We look at the risks, regulations, and more importantly, what you can do to build resilience. This is not just an academic discussion today. We're going to really talk about the future of compliance. We're going to talk about how to future-proof your business in the face of this growing geopolitical and environmental complexity. So here's our roadmap for today. First, we're going to ground ourselves in what rare earth minerals actually are and why they matter. Then we'll examine China's control over this ecosystem, how deep it goes and why it's hard to replicate. Next, we'll look at the compliance and regulatory frameworks emerging globally and how they're forcing companies to rethink sourcing. From there, we'll shift to risk and resilience, what short, mid, and long-term strategies you can put in place to adapt. And finally, we'll close with a detailed roadmap that you can bring back to your organization. By the end of the day, by the end of this 1 hour, you'll have a structured way to lead your company through this current issue that we're seeing. The masterclass is designed, for leaders and operators across the value chain. If you're in executive leadership, compliance, procurement, operations, R&D, or sustainability, this session is for you. We'll address this topic from multiple angles. Strategic risk is one, sourcing complexity, regulatory pressure, and innovation. Whether you're making policy decisions or executing at the BOM level, this will help you better understand the rare earth puzzle and how your function plays a role in trying to solve for it. Let's start with the basics, a one-on-one on rare earth minerals. So rare earths are a set of 17 metallic elements on the periodic table, and they have a very specific magnetic, phosphorescent, and catalytic properties that make them vital to modern technology. They're essentially used in smartphones, electric vehicles, wind turbines, military equipment, and more. They're not technically rare in terms of abundance in the Earth's crust, but what makes them difficult is the extraction and separation process, which is environmentally damaging and highly specialized. And most of that capability, as of today, sits in China. So here's the list of these 17 elements. These 17 elements are often grouped into two categories, light and heavy rare earths. The heavy ones like dysprosium, terbium, and yttrium are especially important for high-performance magnets and are harder to find. China has placed many of these under export controls, and we'll talk a little bit about that a little later, particularly the ones used in defense and renewable energy. So for any manufacturer working with electronics, electric motors, or clean energy components, understanding which of these elements your products depend on is critical for compliance and continuity. I'm not going to read all these names. Some of them are hard to pronounce. So I'm going to let you folks read through all these names here and make sure that you understand these 17 rare earths. Rare earth minerals are baked into the modern economy. So they show up, like I said, in electric vehicle drivetrains, medical imaging devices, laser guidance systems, and even in your iPhone speakers. Their physical properties like magnetic strength, heat resistance, and reactivity make them non-negotiable for performance. And here's the kicker. For many of these applications, there's currently no good substitute. That means if supply is disrupted, the ripple effects are immediate and widespread, especially in these regulated industries. If you're a manufacturer, rare earths are more than just another raw material. They represent a convergence of geopolitical risk, compliance complexity, and engineering dependency. Without access to these minerals, you might not be able to ship products to key markets, or worse, you may not be able to manufacture them at all. Costs are rising, regulations are tightening, and customers are asking more questions about sourcing. We're seeing that with our customer base at Certivo as well. A lot of our manufacturers who are on our platform and their customers are asking them a lot about rare earths. So getting ahead of this now isn't just good practice, it could be mission critical to your future. Now, here's what the global distribution of these rare earth looks like from a resource standpoint. China holds about 37% of global reserves. And what's more important, that it controls nearly 70% of global production. So other countries like Vietnam, Brazil, and even the US have reserves, but they lack the processing infrastructure. And that's the real bottleneck, processing. Mining is only the first step. The refinement and separation of rare earths into a usable form is a highly centralized capability, and China has a multi-decade lead. And that's where their leverage really comes from. China's rare earth supply chain is also vertically integrated. That means it controls mining, refining, processing, and even downstream component manufacturing. So this makes the entire global supply chain dependent on a single point of failure. If China changes its export rules or restricts output, which is what we're seeing, it has also done this before in the past, everyone essentially downstream feels the pain. No other country has this level of integration today, which is why it's so difficult to decouple. Even companies sourcing from outside China may still rely on Chinese refinement. It's also good to understand some historical context here. China didn't really just end up here by accident. Its rare earth dominance is the result of a deliberate industrial policy spanning decades. The government controls mining quotas, enforces export restrictions, and subsidizes local companies to invest in rare earth tech. The goal isn't just economic, it's strategic. By controlling access to these minerals, China can shape global markets, can assert geopolitical influence. So, if you're building a supply chain strategy, you have to account for this policy driven landscape. This isn't just about cost, it's about who controls the entire supply chain. China has established one of the most successful examples of strategic resource control in the modern world. While it mines 60 to 70% of the world's rare earth, it controls nearly 90% of global processing and refining. That's what gives China its edge. It also produces about 85% of the world's rare earth magnets, key components in everything from EVs to defense systems. What sets China apart isn't just volume, but its vertically integrated supply chain and unmatched technical expertise, from mining all the way to finished products. China dominates the rare earth ecosystem for manufacturers. This really means reducing dependence isn't just about finding new mines. It's about building entirely new processing capabilities, which takes time and investment. And look, China's rare earth dominance was no accident. It's a product of decades of strategic planning. Starting in the 1980s, the government made rare earths a national priority, investing in mining, processing, and R&D. They leveraged lower power costs and more relaxed environmental rules to undercut global prices and drive out competition. They absorbed foreign technology through joint ventures and created full industrial ecosystems around rare earths. Western mines shut down because they couldn't compete. So for manufacturers today, this context explains why China's lead is so hard to close. It's systematic, and it's circumstantial. China produces about 210,000 metric tons of rare earth oxides each year, with major operations in Inner Mongolia, Sichuan, and Jiangping. The Bayan Obo mine is the largest rare earth mine in the world. Production is managed through state quotas and controlled by six massive state-owned enterprises, including Minmetals and China Northern Rare Earth. Recently, environmental standards are tightening, but central control still remains strong. For manufacturers, this means China can and does quickly adjust production to meet strategic goals. You're not dealing with a free market here. Just let's be very honest about that. You're dealing with a centrally planned system. China's real edge lies in rare earth processing, especially for the heavy rare earths that we talked about. This step separating similar elements with high purity is technically difficult and it's environmentally risky. China mastered it through years of government funded innovation and tolerance for pollution others avoided. Facilities are specialized and tightly integrated into downstream production. Even rare earths mined elsewhere are often sent to China for processing. That's the kind of control that they have. Until other countries catch up and processing infrastructure, even non Chinese mines won't break this dependency. This is the choke point in the global supply chain. And it's why processing, not mining, is the biggest bottleneck for manufacturers trying to diversify. China's rare earth control gives it significant leverage. Economically, it can influence where high tech manufacturing is located, often within China. Politically, it uses rare earths as a geopolitical tool, just like it did with Japan in 2010. Domestically, it gives preferential access to Chinese manufacturers, boosting competitiveness. And because China controls downstream processing and finished component exports, it captures more revenue than just selling raw materials. So for manufacturers, this isn't just about materials, it's about access, power, and strategic positioning in global supply chains. China's rare earth supply chain is a textbook case for vertical integration. From mining to end products, everything is coordinated. Magnet producers sit next to processors, who sit next to miners, all within industrial clusters designed for efficiency. The government guides the whole system through policy and investment. This setup cuts costs, boosts innovation, and gives China the ability to respond fast to market shifts. For companies outside China, replicating this model isn't easy, but understanding it is essential. Without vertical integration or strong partnerships, it's really hard to compete on cost or on speed. And don't worry about taking notes, etc. The entire recording as well as the PDF will be available to all of you here in the webinar, so don't worry about it. The Chinese rare earth industry is dominated by a handful of powerful players. China Northern Rare Earth controls REEs, the light ones. China Southern Rare Earth handles the heavy REEs, the rare earths that we talked about. So there's the light and the heavy. Minmetals and Shenge resources bring global reach and processing expertise. So that vertical supply chain that we talked about, vertically integrated supply chain that we talked about. JL Mag is a major magnet producer. Companies like Rising Star Rare Earths are now focusing on recycling and sustainability. So all of these operate within a system designed by the Chinese government for strategic advantage. So manufacturers, you should monitor these firms closely, not just as suppliers, but as policy signals and trend setters in the rare earth landscape. China manages its rare earth industry with precision. Production quotas, export licenses, industry consolidation, and environmental regulations are all levers of control. Strategic reserves give it flexibility in times of shortage or price manipulation. Export rules are strict, but domestic producers enjoy tax rebates and easier access. Technology innovation is highly subsidized. So this is that coordinated playbook that we're talking about that maximizes national value while controlling global risk. So for manufacturers, again, it means your access to materials and your cost structure can be influenced overnight by Beijing's decisions. So that's a serious strategic consideration. Over the past 25 years, China has shifted from exporting rare earths freely to tightly controlling them. In the 2000s, quotas were introduced. In 2010, they cut exports dramatically, causing prices to skyrocket. After a WTO ruling, China moved to export taxes and licensing systems. Recently, they're focused on limiting raw material exports in favor of exporting value-added components. In April 2025, about a month before the recording of this webinar, a new export controls targeted 7 key rare earths. This pattern shows to us a clear trend. China adapts its policies, but always keeps the upper hand. And for more global manufacturers, that means constant vigilance. Let's take a case study of what happened in the past, because I've always learned that some of the best ways to learn about how to navigate existing situations is to understand what happened in the past. In 2010, during a diplomatic clash with Japan, China halted rare earth exports. Japan's tech and auto industries were thrown to disarray. Prices for some elements jumped 10 times. The crisis led Japan to diversify suppliers, invest in recycling, develop alternatives. It was a turning point that showed how quickly geopolitics can disrupt industrial operations. The key lesson, if your business depends on rare earths and you don't have a plan, you're exposed. Japan's playbook, diversify, recycle, innovate, is still relevant today and something that we shouldn't ignore and should be part, in my view, of every manufacturer's continuity strategy. China's regulatory framework around rare earths has matured from simple resource management into a complex system of strategic control. Two main agencies run the show: the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology, which manages domestic production quotas and consolidation, and the Ministry of Commerce, that handles export controls. The big shift came in October of 2024 with the formal regulations of management of rare earths. That's what it was called. These designated rare earths as strategic resources introduced traceability rules and ramped up environmental standards. China's export control law is now applied to rare earths, giving the government broad powers to control international supply. So again, for manufacturers, these regulations now create a moving target for compliance, and they're only getting stricter. The new 2024 national regulations marks the first time in China has codified a unified strategy for rare earths. So these rules went into effect on October 1st, 2024. They essentially established quotas at every step: mining, separation, processing. We've talked about the supply chain process there, and created a national strategic reserve. But the more important piece is traceability. So that's a key part of regulation change. So from mine to export, companies must now document where materials come from and how they are processed and by whom. The environmental rules are tougher too, mandating pollution control and cleanup. Penalties for illegal mining or processing are steep. So for global manufacturers, again, this raises the bar on documentation and due diligence. If your supplier doesn't have the right paperwork in order, it's your problem too. So being able to collect that documentation, store it, analyze it, track it, etc., is going to be important, and that's part of the regulatory framework that you'll have to work on as you're working with suppliers overseas. On April 4th, 2025, which is just about a month or so before the recording of this webinar, China imposed new export controls on 7 rare earth elements. I hope you get these names right: samarium, gadolinium, terbium, dysprosium, lutetium, scandium, and yttrium. These 7 rare earths out of the 17 that we talked about are essential for high performance magnets, medical devices, and defense systems. Under the new rules, a license is required not just for pure elements, but for oxides, alloys, and compounds. The government says it's for national security and non-proliferation, but the timing suggests it's also a geopolitical lever, in my opinion. These controls don't ban exports outright, but they introduce uncertainty, delay, and risk. So if you use these elements in your products, you now need to understand where they come from, how they're classified, and whether your supplier has the right export license or not. That's the kind of documentation that you'll have to collect from your supplier. So getting a license to export controlled rare earths from China is now a complex process. That's the heaviness that the government has imposed upon suppliers in China. Suppliers must apply to MOFCOM and provide a mountain of documentation: end user certificates, signed purchase contracts, and technical specs. They must also classify materials under dual use codes. The approval process takes 30 to 45 days, and licenses are typically valid for 6 months. Several factors affect approval: who's buying, what it's for, the current state of diplomacy, and the buyer's country. For importers, this means long lead times, new documentation, obligations, and tighter control with suppliers. It also means you need to budget for uncertainty in your sourcing strategy. Let's look at the 7 elements under this April 2025 export controls that we discussed. Samarium is used in cobalt magnets for high heat environments and some cancer treatments. Gadolinium is key for MRI, contrast agents, and nuclear reactors. Terbium shows up in sonar systems and solid state devices. Dysprosium is essential in EV motors and wind turbines for thermal stability. Lutetium is used in PET scanners, it's used in catalysts. Scandium improves strength in aerospace alloys and fuel cells. Yttrium is in LEDs, lasers, superconductors. So for each of these, you should identify if and where they appear in your supply chain. And it's going to be important for you to at least analyze if these apply to you first, because that's what matters. And this is really not about compliance only, right? Which is also a critical piece of this, but it's also about protecting critical product functions. And China is not messing around with enforcement. Customs inspections now include testing and certification checks. If export controls are violated, fines can reach up to 5 times the illegal value of the shipment. In serious cases, individuals can face criminal charges. Companies might be blacklisted in China's corporate credit system, or they lose their export privileges altogether. Importantly, Chinese suppliers and foreign buyers are jointly liable. So it's not just the supplier. If you're buying from them, you're jointly liable. So which makes supplier vetting and contract language around compliance even more important than we've seen before. So the question I think we're all asking here on this webinar is, what's China trying to achieve with all these controls? It's not just about environmental cleanup or market regulation. In my opinion, these goals are very, very strategic. China wants to conserve resources, protect its environment, and consolidate industry under government control. No doubt that exists. But it also wants to move up the value chain, exporting components, not just raw materials. These regulations also give China leverage in international negotiations, especially with countries restricting Chinese access to semiconductors or other tech. And above all, it's about national security. So for manufacturers, again, understanding this broader strategy is very critical because these aren't just like a bunch of new compliance rules, they're also geopolitical rules. But hey, guess what? The rest of the world is responding. They understand that there's a China dominance when it comes to this entire sector. The US has activated the Defense Production Act and invested hundreds of millions of dollars in mining and processing. The EU passed the Critical Raw Materials Act, aiming to extract, process, and recycle a big chunk of its needs by 2030. Japan is doubling down on recycling and material substitution. Australia and Canada are ramping up domestic production. So these look, they're early efforts and none match China's scale yet, but they signal a global shift. For manufacturers, this means new sourcing opportunities will emerge. They'll take time. Okay, let's just be honest about it. It's going to take some time. But getting involved early with these alternative suppliers could be a strategic move for you. The US and EU have specific policies now tied directly to rare earth security. And that's something that we need to understand here. The Inflation Reduction Act offers clean energy tax credits that require domestic content, meaning your magnets can't come from China. The CHIPS Act supports semiconductor supply chains, including critical materials. The EU's Raw Materials Act sets targets for how much rare earth consumption must be met domestically or through allies. Both are funding R&D into substitutes and recycling. Trade deals now include minerals clauses, and export control coordination is tightening. So these are just not signals, they're incentives and requirements that affect your business decisions today. Looking ahead, we see several clear trends. Look, export controls will become more precise, not broader, but harder to navigate. Traceability is going to become mandatory. Environmental standards will become stricter. Recycling mandates will rise. We'll likely see mineral-based trade alliances and more strategic stockpiling. And rare earths will increasingly become a topic of domestic negotiation with countries overseas. Manufacturers that build flexible, resilient supply chains are the ones that can adapt to all of this. And I think those are not the ones that will only survive, but will actually thrive. The smart move, again, in my opinion, is to get ahead of these trends while others are still reacting. China's new export control and regulatory changes are already creating real disruptions. What we're seeing in the market right now, lead times are increasing, with some materials taking 30 to 45 days longer to arrive due to these licensing delays that we're seeing. Prices for key elements like dysprosium have spiked. They're now straining margins. Documentation requirements are far more detailed now. Some suppliers simply can't provide the info needed. The quality consistency from non-Chinese sources can be hit or miss. Hey, look, they've been controlling the entire supply chain. And all this adds up to some serious risk, right? Production delays, supply chain gaps, loss of customer trust. And while Chinese manufacturers continue getting preferential access, global competitors face new headwinds. The playing field isn't level. And if you don't adapt, you're essentially going to fall behind. So let's talk about, the first step in solving this problem. Like, what do we need to do from here on? The first step to solving the problem is to understand where rare earths show up in your supply chain. My opinion is start with your full bill of materials analysis, including not just raw materials, but components, sub-assemblies, engage suppliers directly, ask which rare earths they use, where they are processed, and whether they're covered under China's export controls. Testing and material verification may be needed, especially for high risk items. Then prioritize based on product criticality and supply risk. Don't try to boil the ocean. In my view, focus on what's vulnerable and important. Build this with cross-functional teams, procurement, engineering, compliance. They all need to come together, sort of a task force, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So what comes out of this is your rare earth dependency map, and it becomes the foundation of everything else. If you're importing rare earths or parts that contain them, compliance doesn't stop at the Chinese border. Most countries now require you to prove that your buying is legal, licensed, and properly documented. That means you need valid export licenses from your Chinese suppliers, proper classification codes, and clear declarations. You also need to track the chain of custody and keep documentation on file, often for 5 years, and be ready for audits. In the US and the EU, you may also have to report the intended end use and the name of your end customers. If you're not already doing this, you need to start building systems now. The compliance is no longer optional, it's now operational. Today's compliance standards, as it relates to rare earths, demand a new level of documentation. You'll need certificates that confirm material composition and chemical specs. You'll need origin records where the ore was mined, where it was processed, export licenses, customs, documentation, supplier declarations. They will all have to be on file. In some case, you'll need third-party testing or audits to back them up, and you'll need to store it all securely and accessibly for at least 5 years. Look, that's a lot of paperwork, but it's also a risk buffer. In a compliance audit or a trade dispute, your ability to prove your supply chain is clean could be the difference between smooth operations and serious disruption. Supply chain mapping is no longer a nice to have. It's the backbone of your rare earth risk management. You'll need visibility beyond your tier one suppliers. That means mapping who processes your materials, who supplies your suppliers, and where that processing occurs. Processing location is critical because China's rules apply even if the ore was mined elsewhere but refined in China. You'll want to assess concentration risk. Look, how many suppliers do you have, how many regions they cover, and where your single points of failure are. There are tools like blockchain, supplier platforms, and traceability software that can all help. But you'll also need good old-fashioned supplier relationships and regular check-ins. The goal is transparency and ultimately control. If this is something that you're interested in, a very shameless plug here, but Certivo can really help this process. Reach out to suppliers, manage getting documentation from them, etc., using our AI-powered platform, and that's something that we excel in, completely. Rare earth prices are also swinging wildly, and that's not going to change. Like after the 2010 crisis, some prices spiked 10x. We're seeing echoes of that now with recent export controls. This volatility will hit your costs hard, and you can destabilize planning. Hedging tools are limited for rare earths, but there are still strategies. Long-term supply contracts, pricing gaps, inventory buffers, and price pass-through clauses in customer contracts. Like you can explore all this. You need to model financial risk across different scenarios. What happens if prices double? or a key material becomes unavailable. So in my view, talk to finance early and often. This isn't just a sourcing issue, right? It's also a P&L issue. As you diversify away from China, you'll also run into another new issue, quality inconsistency. Rare earth materials from newer processors may not meet your specs. Impurities, inconsistent magnetic performance, or variable size distribution can cause real problems in production. So you'll need strong quality controls, standardizing testing protocols, stricter incoming inspections, and tighter supplier qualifications. Be prepared to test batches more frequently. You may also need to guard against counterfeit materials. This is already a growing risk that we are seeing. Track and trace systems help, but so does auditing your suppliers and building long-term relationships. Look, quality can't just be an afterthought. It has to be front and center in your whole diversification strategy. Your supplier contracts are now compliance documents at some level. You need to update them. Add clauses requiring suppliers to secure and maintain valid export licenses, provide documentation and notify you of any regulatory changes, clarify who's liable if there's a compliance failure. Don't leave it too vague. Review force majeure clauses. Do they include any government policy changes? Add in confidentiality terms, especially if you're sharing some sensitive data or sourcing data. If you're working with new or unproven suppliers, build in exit clauses or phased volume increases tied to performance. Contracts are your legal shield in this high risk environment. Make sure they're working for you. Let's take a case study just to understand, how this would work in practice. The auto industry offers one of the best playbooks for rare earth risk management, especially given that 2010 crisis in Japan that we discussed. After the 2010 crisis, Toyota engineered magnets that use less dysprosium. Tesla went even further, switching to motor designs that avoid rare earths altogether in some models. Industry groups form to share data, create recycling programs, and work with new suppliers. Some automakers even made direct investments in rare earth mines. The key takeaway, they acted early, worked across engineering and procurement, and made rare earths a broader level issue. So if you build something that moves EVs, industrial motors, robotics, these lessons apply to you directly. Another case study is from the electronics manufacturing industry. They have faced major rare earth exposures. Apple built robots that recover magnets from old iPhones and reuse them. Samsung diversified its supply base beyond China and invested in R&D. Hitachi re-engineered magnets to use less terbium and dysprosium. So what's common here? A mix of circular innovation, a mix of circular economy, innovation strategies, and supplier partnerships. These companies didn't wait for regulations to force change. They saw the writing on the wall and it paid off. Look, they're not going to wait till their business shuts down because of some regulation in China. They now have more resilient supply chains and can differentiate between sustainability. So you don't have to be $1 trillion company to learn from all of this. You just need to be more proactive about it. To build real resilience, you need a structured framework for assessing rare earths. In our opinion, start by evaluating how critical each material is to your products and operations. Can you ship without it? Then assess the likelihood of disruption. For example, if a material is subject to Chinese export controls, the risk is higher. Think about time horizons. What could hit you next quarter versus 2 years from now? Use both hard data like cost exposure and soft inputs like supplier feedback. This needs to be a cross-functional effort. This can't just be one department working in a silo. Compliance, procurement, engineering, legal, maybe even finance. They all come together. And once built, this framework becomes literally a dashboard. It tells you where to focus, what to fix, and how fast to move. Diversification is your first line of defense. Spread your risk across geographies, suppliers and material forms, oxides, metals, alloys, even finished components. Start by qualifying alternative suppliers for your most vulnerable materials. A tiered approach helps. Prioritize by impact and risk. If you're newer suppliers that you're dealing with, consider investing in supplier development, maybe co-fund equipment or commit to long-term value. If you're too small to do this alone, maybe join a consortium. Remember, diversification comes at a cost. but dependency has an even bigger one. The goal isn't redundancy for everything, it's strategic redundancy where it matters the most. The good news is that viable alternatives to China are emerging. Australia's Lynas is the largest rare earth processor outside of China. The US has MP materials, and the USA rare earth, though some processing still happens in China. Canada, Brazil, Vietnam, and parts of Africa are scaling up. Europe's Rare Earth Industry Association also pushing forward. These sources yet aren't yet at scale, but they're coming. Engage now, even if it's just to build relationships. Be ready when they reach commercial capacity. The companies that move early is what we have seen will get access first, and those who wait will be stuck behind a long line. Stockpiling is a short-term hedge against disruption, but it must be done smartly. First, decide whether you're stockpiling strategically or operationally. Strategic stockpile covers long-term shocks. Operational ones buffer against short-term volatility. Determine how much to hold by looking at material criticality, lead times, volatility. Don't forget storage conditions. Some materials degrade over time. Invest in systems to track shelf life, batch numbers, and turnover. For smaller firms, consortium stockpiles can reduce costs. This isn't a forever solution, but it at least buys you some time when the unexpected hits. Substitution is one of the most powerful but slowest levers. Start by identifying where you're most exposed. Then look for near-term changes like reduced dysprosium magnets that keep performance with less risk. I think the Toyota strategy did exactly that. Long-term, you might switch motor types or use alternative alloys, but this often means redesigns, testing, customer validation. So work with engineering early. Build a substitution roadmap based on feasibility and ROI. Keep investing in R&D. If your competitors get stuck during a crisis and you've already made the switch, that's just not resilience, it's advantage. Recycling is another strategy that's gaining ground. Apple, for example, uses robots to recover magnets from old devices. In process, scrap from your own factory can also be reclaimed. End of life product recovery is harder, but increasingly feasible. Start with high yield items, motors, batteries, magnets are examples, and then you can expand over time. Consider things like closed loop programs where you can recover rare earths and reuse them internally. Keep an eye out on regulatory incentives. Europe, Japan, and even the US are supporting these efforts. Circular strategies aren't just about sustainability, they're also about supply chain independence. Investing in R&D today is how you can protect yourself tomorrow. Focus on material efficiency, using less rare earths to get the same performance. Support alternative material research, maybe with university partnerships. We're seeing some of our companies do that. Improve processes that recover more value from what you already have. Don't forget design optimization. Small tweaks can mean big savings in rare earth usage. Government funding is available, especially in the US and the EU, for companies working on critical material solutions. The smartest companies treat this like a portfolio. Some quick wins, some big bets. The payoff is long-term resilience and potential IP leadership. Vertical integration is another strategy. Some companies are going upstream. That means investing in mines, processing facilities, or even component manufacturing. MP Materials and Tesla are good examples. But look, vertical integration isn't for everyone. It requires capital, time, and operational muscle. You can also do this partially, like joint ventures or long-term offtake agreements. Evaluate whether it makes sense based on your volume, criticality, and risk appetite, and assess country risk. Where you invest matters as much as what you invest in. For companies that get it right, vertical integration creates both the security as well as margin control. And the other problem is, because if this sounds overwhelming to you, just know that you don't have to do this alone. Strategic partnerships, whether with suppliers, customers, or even other competitors, can accelerate progress. Partner with suppliers to develop their capacity and reliability. You can work with customers to align on material substitutions or spec flexibility. Join consortia to co-fund recycling. supplier development or new mines, explore government industry alliances that unlock grants or favorable terms. The best partnerships align incentives that and share upside, and they reduce risk faster than going solo. This is essentially a team sport, find your allies. And what if the worst happens? That's where scenario planning comes in. Mapping out disruption types, a gradual slowdowns, sudden bans, or licensing failures. Define trigger points like price spikes, delivery delays, or regulatory announcements. Then script out your response. Who decides what, how fast you act, how you communicate with suppliers, customers, and regulators. Run tabletop exercises, identify weak spots in your current plan. Look, this isn't just about reaction, it's about preparedness. The more you rehearse now, the less you scramble later. Scenario planning turns fear into readiness and chaos into control. Now let's talk about, sort of a 90-day plan, which is the most immediate action that you can take right now. The first 90 days are all about establishing control. Start with a full rare earth dependency assessment. Map where each material appears in your products and your supply chain. Create a cross-functional task force with procurement, engineering, compliance, and leadership. Implement supplier outreach. Send questionnaires, schedule check-ins, and request documentation. Build a documentation system, capture origin composition, licenses, and traceability. For critical parts, increase inventory buffers as needed, set up alerts for regulatory changes, use tools to assign a team lead to track updates, and finally roll out compliance training across teams. These are your foundations. Get them right now, and the rest becomes easier. Once these basics are in place, then you can shift to more structural moves. Here's a medium-term strategy. Qualify alternative suppliers. Conduct site visits, sample testing, and pilot runs. Build a substitution roadmap. What materials can be reduced, swapped, or redesigned? Deepen supply chain mapping down to tier 2 and tier 3. Launch small-scale recycling or recovery plots. Draft scenario-based response plans for potential disruptions. Update your supply agreements to reflect export control requirements, documentation, and liability terms. Finally, integrate rare earth risk into product development. Start designing with material flexibility in mind. And this is where risk management turns into long-term advantage. The long game is where you pull ahead of competitors. Consider strategic investments, stake in a rare earth mine, joint venture in a processing plant, or co-funding supply growth. Launch serious R&D efforts around alternatives, efficiency, and recovery. Evaluate vertical integration opportunities, not just to secure supply, but to lock in margin. Joint industry consortia or lead one. Help set standards and shape market direction. Engage with policymakers. Become a thought partner in building secure supply chains. Align rare earth strategy with your broader business roadmap. And where others are hit with the next disruption, you will be the one still shipping, still delivering, and still leading. This initiative won't succeed without clear ownership. This task force that we talked about multiple times is very important. So create this task force with defined roles, a program lead, engineering, procurement, compliance, legal, finance, put them all together. They should report directly to an executive sponsor, ideally someone who can allocate resources and make fast decisions. Set meeting cadences, reporting formats, and issue escalation paths. Give the team access to tools, budgets, and decision rights. Track success through KPIs, supplier diversification, compliance incidents, risk reduction milestones. When done well, this task force becomes a control tower, coordinating internal efforts, guiding strategic decisions, and ensuring reliance becomes embedded, not just episodic. Your compliance program is only as strong as any monitoring system that you might have. So you'll need tools to manage documentation, material specs, export licenses, origin data, and supplier certifications. Build workflows for supplier verification and internal audits. Track new regulations, assess their impact on your materials and sourcing. Provide regular compliance reporting, monthly for the ops team, quarterly for leadership, and annually to the board. Link rare earth compliance to your broader product compliance systems, REACH, ROS, ROAS, is that how some people pronounce it, Prop 65, etc. And consider tech platforms to automate parts of this. the goal isn't just checking boxes, it's real-time visibility and control. And again, this is where Certivo can really help bring all these efforts into a single consolidated system. We already manage compliance for several manufacturers globally across every category: Reach, Ross, Tisca, Crop 65, Pops, etc., etc. And China Rare Earth is just another part of that entire bigger, broader effort for compliance. Rare earth risk isn't just a supply chain issue, it's a stakeholder issue. Internally, keeping teams involved and informed about regulations, risks, and response plans will really give you an edge. With suppliers, share your expectations and compliance requirements, listen to their constraints. With customers, be transparent about what you're doing and how it benefits them. Investors care too, especially as rare earths touch on ESG, trade policy, and long-term resilience. Engage regulators and industry groups, help shape policy, don't just respond to it. And finally, prepare your media response strategy. If a crisis hits, you want your company to be ready, proactive, prepared, and trustworthy. Look, resilience has a price, but with planning, it doesn't have to break the bank. Start with a cost impact assessment. What will compliance, stockpiling, diversification, and R&D really cost? Align spending with material risk. Don't overspend on low impact items. Build business cases for major investments, showing both cost avoidance and strategic benefit. Update pricing strategies, pass through costs when appropriate. Look for external funding, grants, subsidies, tax credits are available, and use financial modeling to compare scenarios. It's not about spending less, it's about spending smarter with a clear link to continuity and competitive positioning. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. Track KPIs across these 6 areas. Number 1, compliance performance, documentation rates, audit outcomes. Number 2, resilience, number of qualified suppliers, backup inventory. Number 3, financials, cost of compliance, cost of disruption. Number 4, progress milestones, how many roadmap items are complete. Number 5, industry benchmarking, how do you compare to your peers. Number 6, continuous improvement, how often you can find and fix gaps. Build a simple dashboard and review it regularly with leadership. Metrics create accountability and they make progress visible, which builds momentum. And look, you're not alone. There are excellent resources out there, industry groups like the Responsible Minerals Initiative or the Rare Earths Industry Association, government programs like the US's DOE's Critical Materials Institute or the EU's Raw Materials Alliance offer grants, data, and partners. Consultants and advisors can fill gaps in compliance, legal, or technical areas. Universities and national labs are doing cutting-edge work on recycling and substitution. And supply intelligence platforms like Certivo help you monitor risk and regulation. So don't try to build this ecosystem from scratch. Plug into what's already out there and accelerate your results. And so that's it. I know there's a lot to take in. It's an important topic. We've covered a lot. We've explored this rare earth landscape, China's strategic position, and the growing regulatory and compliance burden. We've reviewed the risks to manufacturing and the specific actions you can take across compliance, sourcing, R&D, and your policy. So your next step is clear. Activate your task force, assess your exposure, and begin implementing your roadmap. Don't wait until the next disruption. Use this moment that has already happened, April 2025. Use this moment to lead, not just react. Rare earth resilience isn't just about compliance. It's about continuity, credibility, and competitive edge. So if you move now, your company won't just survive the next wave. You'll be in front of everyone. So that's kind of it in part of the presentation today. I want to sort of thank everyone for your time in joining us. I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I will most certainly send this information out to all the participants in the call. That if you didn't attend, you can certainly view this at your own time. And if you have any questions, again, please go to certivo.com, set up a call with us. And we'd love to kind of understand your strategy. We'd like to really understand, how you're managing this process today. And if you're interested in a free trial of Certivo, we're happy to provide that as well to see how you can take control of your supply chain and compliance across not just China rare earth minerals, but all categories as a whole. And of course, with a focus on China rare earth right now. All right. Thank you again. This is Kunal Chopra, CEO of Certivo signing off. And hopefully we'll see you, on another webinar or certainly interacting with us soon. Thank you so much. Bye bye.